All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're cracking open one of the most provocative and honestly challenging works in all of philosophy, Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. This is a book that doesn't just want to argue a point, it wants to detonate one.
This is exactly how Nietzsche saw himself, and really, it's the perfect way to understand what he was trying to do. He wasn't just another philosopher in a long line of thinkers. He saw himself as a force of nature, here to just blow up centuries of assumptions about philosophy and morality. So let's see what happens when that fuse gets lit.
And here it is. He actually had to publish this book at his own expense back in the mid-1880s. And at first, almost nobody paid attention. I mean, it sold just over 100 copies in its first year. But inside this book, Nietzsche laid out the explosive core of his most mature ideas. So, what was his mission? What was he trying to blow up? Well, it was nothing less than a full-scale re-evaluation of the two great pillars of all of Western thought, our ideas about truth and our ideas about morality. He wanted to get under them and see if the foundations were even solid. And he starts by going after the most fundamental quest of every philosopher ever, the relentless, unending pursuit of truth with a capital T. He basically asks, hey, what if we've been going about this whole thing completely wrong? So with this famous metaphor, Nietzsche is suggesting that truth isn't some prize you can just win with logic or, as he puts it, grotesque seriousness. He's saying that these dogmatic philosophers, with all their clumsy and heavy-handed arguments, have only managed to scare away the very thing they're trying to capture. You see, Nietzsche's take is that these grand philosophical systems, the ones that claim to be built on pure objective reason, are actually built on something way less impressive. Things like old superstitions, clever word games, or, and I love this phrase, a seduction of grammar. Basically, just their own personal biases dressed up to look like universal laws. And you can just feel his contempt for those old systems right here. He's ruthlessly mocking the great Immanuel Kant. When Kant asks this super complex question about how we can have certain knowledge, his answer pretty much boils down to, well, because we have a faculty for it. Nietzsche just found this ridiculous. He compares it to a doctor in a play who explains that opium makes you sleepy because it has a sleep-inducing faculty. In other words, it's not an answer at all. You're just repeating the question in a fancier way. So after taking a pretty good swing at truth, Nietzsche turns his dynamite on an even more sacred target, morality itself. Now, here's Nietzsche's big, explosive claim. He says that the dominant morality of his time, which was Christian European morality, isn't some divine law handed down from on high. No. He says it's a system of values that was designed for the herd. It praises virtues that make people tame, predictable, and easy to manage for the good of the group. It's all about safety and comfort over everything else. And he lays out this really sharp contrast between what he calls herd morality and a noble morality. Just look at this comparison. The herd values things like pity, being modest, and being useful to the group. The noble morality, on the other hand, comes from a powerful individual who says yes to themselves. Someone who creates their own values, who can stand alone, and who embraces a life of risk and self-responsibility. But Nietzsche throws in a pretty stark warning here. This path of questioning everything, of fighting the monsters of old beliefs, it is incredibly dangerous. Because when you tear down the very foundations of good and evil, you run the risk of confronting the chaos, the abyss, that's right inside your own soul. So, okay, if traditional truth and morality are just constructs, then what's really going on underneath it all? For Nietzsche, every single thing we do, every belief we hold, it all comes back to one single fundamental drive. And he calls this the will to power. Now, this is maybe one of his most misunderstood ideas. It is not just about a crude desire for political control or using brute force. It's much deeper. It's this intrinsic drive that exists in every living thing, to grow, to express its own strength, to overcome obstacles, and to shape the world according to its own perspective. Think about it like this. A tree growing and reaching for the sun is expressing its will to power. An artist who creates a masterpiece is expressing their will to power. And for Nietzsche, even a philosopher building some grand system of truth is also expressing their will to power, the will to impose their interpretation onto everyone else. Your morality, your art, your beliefs, they're all just symptoms of this fundamental drive. So you can see how this radical worldview, one that sees everything through this lens of the will to power, well, it calls for a totally new kind of thinker.
someone who can operate beyond all the old rules and dogmas.
For Nietzsche, this means the true philosopher isn't some dusty scholar who just analyzes what's already happened. No, they are creators. They don't just describe the world, they reach into the future and with a creative hand, they declare, this is how it should be. They actually forge new values and give humanity brand new goals to strive for. And this is who he calls the free spirit. This isn't just someone who rejects old ideas for the sake of it. This is an individual who is strong enough to stand completely alone, to create their own moral compass, and to actually live by it. They're the ones who are courageous enough to go on what Nietzsche calls dangerous voyages of discovery into the totally uncharted territory of what humans can be. In the end, Beyond Good and Evil doesn't give us a new set of rules to live by. Not at all. It just hands us a stick of dynamite. It's a terrifying and maybe exhilarating challenge to look at the very foundations of our own beliefs. Nietzsche leaves us with a task, to have the courage to ask, what are the unquestioned truths and morals that define our world today? And do we have the strength to think beyond them?